Thank you. The next item of business is a debate on motion 17980 in the name of Craig Hoy on demanding a better deal for taxpayers in Scotland. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Craig Hoy to speak to and to move the motion 17980. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Under the SNP, Scots are being hammered with high taxes, whilst public services continue to decline. That's why the motion that I move in my name in this Parliament, a Parliament that is paid for by each and every taxpayer, will force every MSP to decide whose side they are on, whether they want to be on the side of the bloated SNP state or on the side of delivering a better deal for Scottish taxpayers. Taxpayers who are sick and tired of an SNP government that costs them more but delivers less. Sick and tired of a government that spends their money on inward-looking fringe obsessions like gender reform and policing free speech. Sick and tired of paying for meaningless quangos and a civil service which has doubled in size since 2014. Presiding Officer, people are paying more for public services that simply aren't working. We all know deep down that this is the case because our constituents tell us this. Our postbags and our inboxes lay bare 18 years of SNP failure on schools, hospitals, roads and railways. But it's clear from the amendments today that it's only the Scottish Conservatives who know what the public wants and needs. That's why we propose a tax cut for Scottish workers, scrapping the 20 and 21 pence rates to create a simplified 19 pence rate up to £43,600 a year. That's a tax cut for hard workers of up to £444, while still funding frontline public services. I've got a lot of ways to identify, so I will if I can later. Presiding Officer, the SNP are costing Scotland £1 billion a year in lost growth and countless billions more through incompetence and waste. The SNP government boasts that its so-called progressive taxation, a system which taxes nurses and teachers more, is bringing in £1.7 billion a year. But the Scottish Fiscal Commission estimates that there is an economic performance gap between Scotland and the rest of the UK of £1.1 billion this year alone. So we know what is really going on, because the impact of the SNP's tax rises on Scots feel very real indeed, but the benefits are simply another SNP false promise. That missing billion, in black and white, is the true cost of John Swinney. Now, the Fiscal Commission is being characteristically diplomatic in describing it as an economic performance gap. I call it the deep and corrosive economic effect of 18 years of this anti-growth, anti-business SNP government. Now, every independent forecaster, from the IFS to the OBR to the SFC and to Fraser of Allender, warns that this SNP government cannot continue on the fiscal and spending path it is on. A benefits bill set to soar to £10 billion by the end of the year, £2 billion more than this government can afford. The number of senior civil servants is soaring, and quango after quango is spewing out bizarre and costly recommendations and regulations. John Swinney's high-tax, low-growth Scotland simply cannot continue, and that means taking head-on the SNP's client state. When we brought forward our fully costed plans for tax cuts this year, Shona Robertson said it would be impossible. But only on Monday, John Swinney finally admitted that she's got it wrong, announcing that this week the SNP government will itself reveal £1 billion of SNP waste it has itself identified. But when the SNP talks of public sector reform, we don't expect much action. We would, however, deliver it, reducing the size of the civil service back to pre-2116 levels within 5 years, a new Taxpayer Savings Act to cut the number of quangos by a quarter through closing down and merging unnecessary bodies such as the Scottish Land Commission and Community Justice Scotland, creating a Scottish agency of value and efficiency, SAVE, a short-term business-led body designed to mount a war on waste to claw back £500 million of misspent public money. Tighter public spending rules, clamping down on the frivolous use of taxpayers' money, introducing sanctions on individuals who breach these rules. and we'd apply a zero-based accounting system into the annual budgetary process of the Scottish Government. And we'd go on to reduce red tape on public services like the NHS by reducing their statutory reporting requirements. We'd also slash the cost of government, making efficiencies in PR and HR departments. That's more doctors, fewer spin doctors and more shared service hubs right across government. We'd make sure that every public sector worker is focused on delivering for taxpayers, banning woke roles around equality, diversity and inclusion. And we would end once and for all the Scottish Government's obsession with gender issues, banning the production of all non-statutory guidance related to gender identity or trans issues across the public sector. But there is more work we need to do. I will give way briefly to John Mason.
John Mason.
Well, I thank the member for giving way, and he has given some examples, which was what I was going to ask him for. But, I mean, he says we want saving railways. Does that mean safety goes down the way? He says reduce reporting requirements, and yet his colleague next to him always asks for more transparency. Surely he can't have both.
Craig Hoy.
I have two papers here that I will gladly give to John Mason that detail everything we can do to cut the horrendous waste across the Scottish public sector. And there is more work we need to do to dismantle the SNP's secretive and inefficient client state. We'd remove these smoke and mirrors around public sector decision-making by extending lobbying laws to organisations who are funded by SNP ministers just to tell SNP ministers what it is they want to hear. And we'd create a new accountability and transparency dashboard, which would provide clear information about how taxpayers' money is spent and who signed it off. Deputy Presiding Officer, there are two sorts of SNP waste. The sort that rightly angers people and the sort that rightly and roundly outrages them. Take the Health Secretary, using a taxpayer-funded limousine to meet his friends in the pub for a pre-match pint prior to going to the football. It is to Neil Gray's discredit that he has not resigned, but it is to the public's dismay that John Swinney has not sacked him. Such is the level of SNP contempt for hard-pressed taxpayers that this sort of behaviour goes unchecked in SNP Scotland. Deputy Presiding Officer, the SNP says it will change, but the past is the best guide to the future. The SNP's credit score with the country is seriously impaired. £1 billion wasted on Barlinnie Prison meant to cost just £100 million. £500 million wasted on 2 out-of-date ferries. £50 million wasted on malicious prosecutions. And £30 million wasted on a national care service that was scrapped even before it started. That's the reality of the SNP's casual disregard for taxpayers' money. In contrast, we would deliver tax cuts for workers. We would wage a war on waste right across government and tackle head-on the SNP's bloated client state. These are the policies based on sound, common-sense Conservative values that Scotland so badly needs. Sadly, it will never get them from this SNP government.
Thank you, Mr Hoy. I now call on Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson to speak to and to move Amendment 17980.2.
Presiding Officer,
up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'll start by moving the amendment in my name. The investment that we're making this year in our public services is made possible by the tax choices that we've taken and the vital additional funding that this provides. And the Tories and indeed other opposition members need to explain to this Parliament what they would cut if we'd not taken these tax decisions, but instead, what we often hear are the demands for further spending and at the same time cuts to taxation. And of course,
Cabinet Secretary, please resume your seat. Just 1 second, just to set some parameters here. I appreciate some individuals are seeking to ask an intervention, which is perfectly laudable. I know others are shouting from a certain position, which is not acceptable and will not happen, not least because I will have to keep interrupting, which will shorten the debating time of members who are further down the list in this debate. Cabinet Secretary, please resume.
Instead, what we often hear are the demands for further spending and at the same time cuts to taxation. Their position is not credible, and of course the public know it's not credible, which is why the Tories of course have such low support among the public. And I'll take Liz Smith.
Liz Smith.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary giving way, but in Mr Hoy's speech he spelt out exactly what measures the Conservatives are going to take. Why is it that the Cabinet Secretary can't admit that?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we know the standard of what is provided by the Tories. Unfunded tax cuts made on the back of a fag packet, presiding officer. So we will take no lessons from a party that destroyed the economy, many of whom on those benches supported Liz Truss and her economic policies, which hard-pressed householders are still paying through their mortgage payments. So we've had Tory economic policy over the years, which Michael Mara seems to want to defend for some very strange reason. But anyway, we know that the Conservatives proposed almost £1 billion in tax cuts last year in advance of the budget, and the impact of their approach on our essential public services, including our NHS, would be profound. Our progressive approach to tax underpins the entire Scottish budget, allowing us to support the most generous social contract in any part of the UK, which includes things like free prescriptions, free higher education and support such as the Scottish Child Payment, all put at risk. Contrast this with the Conservatives' income tax proposals, which would seek to reverse our progressive approach, giving the greatest tax cut to the top 25% of income tax payers. Do you want to?
Stephen Kerr.
Sorry.
Cabinet Secretary for giving way. When did she first become aware that there were at least £1 billion of savings to be made in efficiencies, as revealed in the Glasgow Herald on Monday? Where is she looking for the £1 billion? And if it's so difficult for her to understand this, and I don't believe it can be, what we're putting forward is a costed programme of savings. The government are saying they're going to save £1 billion. Where's the £1 billion to be saved? Let us hear where the £1 billion will be saved.
Stephen Kerr, I'm sure, will be on the front bench tomorrow waiting to hear Ivan McKee's statement on public service reform, when we will set out the work which is already underway. This has started many years ago, accelerated by the work of the Minister for Public Finance, and Stephen Kerr will see the detail of that tomorrow, and I'm sure he'll be present for that. The opposition, of course, are also keen to talk down the Scottish economy. Day in, day out, we hear that in this place, and the reality is that the Scottish economy is one of the best performing parts of the UK. I will if I've got time later. Since 2007, GDP per person in Scotland has grown by 10.3% compared to 6.1% in the UK, and productivity has grown at an average rate of 1.1% per year compared to the UK average of 0.4%. And most recently, in 2024, Scotland's economy grew 1.2% compared to the UK rate of 1.1%. I'll give way to Daniel Johnson.
It will need to be very brief, Mr Johnson.
Would the Cabinet Secretary care to quote those figures since 2016 and acknowledge whether they're higher or lower for Scotland compared to the UK for that time period?
Cabinet Secretary.
Oh, it's the long-term growth that matters, and I don't know why. Well, I don't know why Daniel Johnson. I don't know why Daniel Johnson and the opposition, no thank you, can't accept it being a good thing, that since 2007 GDP per person in Scotland has grown by 10.3% compared to 6.1% in the UK. Why can't they just simply accept that as a good thing?
Could I just say to members that the Cabinet Secretary is now in her last minute?
Craig Hoy talked about an economic performance gap, but of course Professor Graham Roy from the Scottish Fiscal Commission has been clear that what is being referred to in the context of income tax is not an assessment of Scottish Government policy or performance. Rather, it is, and I quote, purely a technical measure and is not meant to be a commentary on the Scottish Government performance. That is what Graham Roy from the Scottish Fiscal Commission has said. And to conclude, presiding officer, the spending review that we saw last week has not helped the position in Scotland, seeing an increase of spending by just 0.8% over the next 3 years, compared to an average of 1.2% for UK departments. That leaves us facing a £1.1 billion shortfall. So the spending review was disappointing for both resource spend and capital and infrastructure investment. Coming back to the point about public service reform, Ivan McKee tomorrow will set out the detail of what we have been doing and will do, and we'll do it in a way that is sustainable worked out the detail, not the nonsense that we've heard from the Tories today.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I next call Michael Mara to speak to and move Amendment 17980.1. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'll begin by moving the amendment in my name. In a feat of what is a surprisingly accurate economic analysis you would not expect from the acolytes of Liz Truss, the Scottish Tories have pinpointed one of the deep problems at the heart of Scotland's finances, and that problem is, of course, the SNP government. An abysmal record of 18 years of waste, incompetence and, increasingly, chaos. £6.7 billion of taxpayers' money wasted on ferries that don't sail, prisons that don't get built, a deposit return scheme that didn't recycle a single bottle, a national care service that didn't employ a single carer. Hard-working Scots quite literally paying the price of SNP failure, with over £1.6 billion spent on the scandal of delayed discharge because the SNP cannot get Scotland's NHS working. Now, whenever I normally lay out that litany of waste, it is met with complaint and howls of derision from the SNP benches. But it's good to have supporters on the front bench today with the belated admission that, by their own estimates, they waste £1 billion a year. And that's, of course, on top of the tally that I've just laid out. But Scotland has also suffered from the chaos and financial mismanagement of finance secretaries who, with one exception, still sit around the cabinet table. Failure to supply crucial information to the independent forecaster, refusal to publish core documents, including a pay policy, capital spending plans or the medium-term financial strategy. Chaotic, knee-jerk, in-year announcements, such as the council tax freeze that nobody knew about, putting party politics always first. Budget after budget that don't even last 6 months, with 3 consecutive years now of emergency in-year cuts, slashing funding across the board to balance the books. There's no real other word for it. It's complete and utter chaos. And the Labour Party believes strongly in progressive taxation, but to ensure public support for progressive taxation, you have to show people what they get in return. And the SNP have utterly failed to do so. Every year, Scots are paying more and getting less in return. 1 in 6 Scots on NHS waiting lists, schools sliding down the international league tables, a housing emergency, councils cutting key services, better public services, more investment, a better standard of living. That's what people should be getting from paying their fair share in tax. And under the SNP, it couldn't be further from the truth. But meanwhile, the Tories have failed to acknowledge the economic and fiscal realities within which the UK operates. British public finances were left in a truly terrible state by the last Tory government. Over 14 years, they presided over a low-wage, no-growth economy. They inflicted austerity on public services, doing lasting damage to all of them. They crashed the economy, sending interest rates spiralling. They presided over a cost-of-living crisis with sky-high inflation not seen since the 1970s. And they closed the last Parliament with living standards lower than the opening of the Parliament for the first time since the Napoleonic Wars. They spent the last year of that Parliament promising money they did not have in a desperate attempt to buy votes, leaving a gaping black hole in Britain's public finances. They spent the annual National Reserve, Mr Hoy, the annual National Reserve, 3 times over in the first 3 months of that year. And all of that left the incoming UK Labour government with a major clean-up operation to undertake. No apology from the Conservatives, no humility and no shame. Frankly, their plans today aren't worthy of the back of a fag packet. This afternoon, they have half-baked, reheated tax cuts to the Chamber, and we shouldn't believe a word of it. Cutting down on quangos does not deliver the savings needed for such a drastic tax cut. It would surely mean deep cuts to core public services like our NHS. And the Scottish Fiscal Commission has, of course, projected that NHS will account for an increasingly large share of the Scottish budget, up to almost 55% in the next 50 years. With an ageing population, that investment is absolutely essential. Are the Conservatives really proposing we defund our NHS to fund tax cuts? So the UK Labour government is facing up to the mess that both parties in this chamber here have made of our country. Last week's game-changing spending review saw record investment for Scotland, with £9.1 billion boost to Scotland's budget, the highest settlement in the history of devolution. No, thank you.
Mr Maher is about to conclude.
The Chancellor's spending review, and these are the words, if I can give you, of the Daily Record. The Chancellor's spending review means that SNP government can no longer blame Westminster for Scotland's ills. Successive SNP First Ministers have cited UK government austerity as the reason for struggling services. Rachel Reeves, who has handed Holyrood an extra £9.1 billion, has called time on that excuse. excuse. Enough of the excuses from the SNP. Enough of the half-baked ideas from the Tories. Let's get our economy moving.
Yeah, yeah.
I now call on Lorna Slater to open on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Presiding officer, in this debate, we'll be covering ground that we've covered many times before. Although the Scottish Conservatives routinely ask in this chamber for additional spending, they also routinely deride the taxation that is needed to provide that spending. The Tory magic money tree is sadly a figure of their imaginations. In the real world, countries need to generate revenue, and that means taxation. Taxation is the means by which we pool our resources for the collective good. This money is then allocated for spending and investment by a democratically elected government. It is a truth not universally accepted in the UK that if you want Scandinavian levels of public services, you have to pay Scandinavian levels of tax. Believing in a magic money tree or in the growth fairy doesn't eliminate this truth, however much you wish that it might. High GDP growth does not, by itself, contribute to quality of life and society. What it tends to do in isolation is indicate that the rich are getting richer, while more and more people get left behind. We only have to look to America to see this. High GDP growth, staggering levels of poverty, homelessness, violence, people without health care, and high maternal mortality. No matter what your GDP is, redistribution of wealth is needed to fund public services and to ensure a functioning society. Without wealth redistribution, the rich will get forever richer, while the poor will get poorer, until the fabric of society frays and falls apart. For those who do believe in a growth-first economic model, i.e., once we have growth, then we can put money towards community centres and universal childcare, what is the magic level of growth that suddenly unlocks that policy change? When has enough wealth been generated that we can start to redistribute it? This model is a toolbox fallacy. Our society, certainly.
Liz Smith.
Grateful to Lorna Slater giving way. One of the pieces of evidence is something called the Laffer curve, which, as some of her predecessors in government knew, is a diagram, shall we call it, that shows you that the more that you are increasing tax, sadly, at one point the revenue starts to go down.
I am aware of the Laffer curve. I'm also aware of where it's been discredited and where it applies. It applies specifically to income taxes and not to the kind of taxes that the Scottish Greens advocate, such as land value tax and wealth taxation. Our society is extremely wealthy. There is no shortage of money. It's just that it's concentrated in the hands of a few very wealthy people. For a bit of fun, when preparing for this debate, I put this question into an AI. Between lower house prices, free tuition, baby boxes, free prescriptions, free bus travel for under 22s, free eye tests and free social care, is a person earning 100 grand per year in Scotland better off than a person in England, even with Scotland's different income tax regime? And the conclusion that the AI came to was this: if you are single, child-free and healthy, England may offer a better net income. But if you have a family, children in education, or elderly relatives needing care, which is most of us, Scotland's public services can provide significant non-cash value that may outweigh the tax difference. I only have 4 minutes. I then asked the AI, what about someone earning an average wage? And the response was, for someone earning an average wage, Scotland is likely better off than England due to a comparable and slightly lower income tax, significant savings from public services, and a lower cost of living. Thank you, AI. I couldn't have said it better.
Thank you, Ms Slater. And I now call on Willie Rennie to open on behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats.
I think I like this new Lorna Slater, who...
Mr Rennie, could we have some courtesy and respect shown on behalf of the Conservative benches, please, to other speakers in this debate? Thank you. And I now call Willie Rennie to open on behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. Up to 4 minutes, please.
I do like this new Lorna Slater, who's outsourcing intelligence to artificial intelligence. We may see some new radical policies, perhaps. more radical than even before. But I do like a robust, colourful contribution in this chamber. I admire Craig Hoy for his approach to politics, because it sometimes is very entertaining and educational on occasion as well. I have to say today's performance was rather kamikaze in his approach, because I was looking back to 2022, I think it was, and there was a headline in a newspaper that said Boris Johnson Partygate scandal, in quotes, a difference of opinion, says Craig Hoy. Now, I'm in full of and he was somehow dismissing the Partygate in the House of Commons. Now, I think it's reasonable to ask questions of Neil Gray, but as long as we understand that we need to reflect on our own past comments and observations on our own party when we're making those observations. But also to make the speech that he did about economic and financial competence, when likewise his party in the past is responsible for Liz Truss, Brexit and even Boris Johnson, takes a great degree of courage from Craig Hoy. So I give him full credit for making that attempt this afternoon. Public service reform should be boring. It should be boring, detailed, hard work to find out where the efficiencies can be made. The more exciting public service reform is, the more superficial it obviously is. And therefore it's more of a vote-catching effort than it is a real attempt at public service reform. And I'm afraid to say Craig Hoy's list today was just all eye-catching rather than a real attempt at trying to change the way that public services operate. The size of the state has increased. There is no doubt. What we need to work out is how we get it back down to pre-COVID levels at a detailed understanding. And I hope tomorrow that the Minister sets out a very clear programme of boring, detailed change that actually results in a difference, because it's the difference that really matters in the long run. We also need to see digital and AI, and this is where I perhaps agree with Lorna Slater. We do need digital and AI to be at the heart of the work that we're doing, because I am afraid the number of experts I speak, just in a second, the number of experts that I speak to in this sector believe the government just isn't at the races about being able to align the public services in a way that digital can be used in processes to bring uniformity and deliver efficiencies. And I know there's many experts out there that are saying exactly that. I've only got 4 minutes, I'm afraid. The main point I want to make today, though, is that in order to get our public finances back on track, we need to get our economy moving. And the biggest problem we have is the economic inactivity rate, which is at 24%. In England, it's at 21%. So it's not much better, but it's just dreadful in Scotland. And at the heart of this is getting the NHS to be in a position to get people back to work who would work if they were able to do so. And it's the ailments of the mind now, when in the past it used to be ailments of the body. We need to change the way, we need to reorientate the NHS to be focused on economic productivity. That makes a tremendous difference to the taxes that we raise and to be able to the public services we can afford. And if we can sort that, then we'll have achieved something in this Parliament.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. We will now move to the open debate. I would advise members that the small amount of additional time that had been available has been entirely used up by the preceding front bench exchanges. So I will need to stick to a 4-minute limit, and any interventions taken must be absorbed within the members' agreed speaking time. With that, I call Rachel Hamilton, to be followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This afternoon, my colleague Craig Hoy has outlined a common-sense vision for Scotland's economy, a vision rooted in fairness, ambition and opportunity. And because we fundamentally believe that Scots deserve a better deal than what they're currently getting under this SNP government. After 18 years in power, they've presided over a stagnating economy, a ballooning civil service and economic performance, gap of £1.1 billion and billions of taxpayers wasted money on pet projects, money that should have gone to frontline services instead. Presiding Officer, the list of failures from the SNP is long, too long to go through this afternoon. The impact is simple. People are paying more and getting less, and that is something I agree with Michael Mara. One of the key differences between the Scottish Conservatives and other parties in this chamber is that we believe in small government. We believe in empowering people to succeed, not holding them back. But the SNP, Greens and Labour want to keep people stuck in the doldrums in perpetuity. Whilst the Scottish Conservatives support vulnerable people, the SNP are handing out hard-earned taxpayers' money, with the cost of the welfare estate expected to reach £9 billion by 2030. The cosy left-wing consensus that has held Scotland back for decades is dumbing down Scotland rather than lifting it up. I will on that point.
Cabinet Secretary.
And specify more who the handouts are being given to. Who are we talking about here?
Rachel Hamilton.
We have identified many tax-saving policies that you can implement through this policy, and we agree with the Scottish Child Payment, but we want to see people being lifted up, not being knocked down. We want to see jobs, we want to see people supported into work. We don't want them held back like the Scottish Government are holding back the economy. Even the Scottish Fiscal Commission, Shona Robertson, have told us that Scotland faces £851 million income tax black hole due to the rising cost of benefits, public sector pay and new policy commitments. Beyond fiscal mismanagement, which Shona Robertson doesn't seem to identify that the SNP are mismanaging the economy, the SNP has a bloated public sector that now accounts for the second highest share of employment of any region or nation in the UK. And the bureaucracy continues to grow. Scotland now has 130 quangos and more on the way. Then there's the tax system, described as daft by one of their own MSPs. Presiding Officer, Scotland is now the highest tax part of the United Kingdom, and this is not something to be proud of. The SNP should be ashamed. Workers here are unfairly penalised, paying more tax than those doing the same jobs elsewhere in the UK. And in my constituency, in the Scottish Borders, residents told me last week that they feel like they've been paying more but getting less. Again, something that we've heard many times in this chamber. They see local services in decline, despite SNP claims to the contrary. We must offer people a different path for Scotland, a better path to economic prosperity. The Scottish Conservatives have put forward positive, practical policies that would improve people's lives. We believe in a smaller, more efficient state that delivers better value for money, better services for lower taxes. We would give Scottish taxpayers a better deal by cutting taxes to 19% for all taxable income up to £43,600. This would be worth £444 to ordinary working Scots. We believe in restoring value for money. And we'd introduce a Taxpayer Saving Act, which, of course, we're going to hear tomorrow from Ivan McKee around the public sector reform. They clearly agree that there's blob and bloat in their own government. We believe in rebuilding trust with the public. I will close, Presiding Officer. We believe that Scotland can do better, and the SNP should be listening to the Scottish Conservatives.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. I now call Kenneth Gibson to be followed by Alexander Stewart. Mr Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And let's start with a ludicrous suggestion after taking no pay rise and with cumulative UK inflation of 70% over 17 years that Scottish Ministers should continue wearing a hair shirt, enduring declining real-term incomes year on year. What other groups in society do Tories feel shouldn't receive a pay rise for 17 years? Certainly not UK ministers, of whom there are now 121 under successive Labour coalition and Tory governments, with not a peep from the Westminster devotees to my left, completely devaluing an already threadbare argument. This is just a cheap, nasty and rather pitiful shot that devalues what was already a poorly cobbled together, incoherent motion. On taxation, the Tories suggest they would cut tax by up to £444 for every person in Scotland. I wasn't aware that every person in Scotland paid tax, as this clumsily written motion suggests. Children's pensioners, prisoners, students unemployed, etc. don't, and up to £444 means some will gain very little. Not an average, I note. Up to. It's like buying double glazing, up to X pounds off. They must do better to reclaim even a soupçon of credibility lost by backing the Liz Truss economic catastrophe less than 3 years ago, leading to the highest UK tax take since World War II. And how much would the Tory tax reduce spending by, and what would be cut? They suggest a nice, easy target they call highly paid public sector senior executives, whilst the UK Tory government they urged us to re-elect last year didn't cut such jobs. We should apparently, but which ones? And what would be the impact on public service delivery if talented people voted with their feet and left the public sector? It's just empty, lazy, thoughtless populism aimed at clawing back votes from the Faragists. We will no doubt have the same tedious litany of Tory MSPs demanding more expenditure in every single Scottish Government portfolio ad nauseam come budget time. It's as boring as it is stupefyingly predictable. If the Tories truly believed in a crackdown on waste, one might be more sympathetic. But the tens of billions their UK government wasted on shoddy defence procurement, dodgy PPI, often provided by Tory pals, and HS2, delayed again and set to cost over £100 billion, belies that. As for the economic performance gap, let me quote the evidence Professor Roy gave to the Finance and Public Administration Committee last week. And I quote, "The next tax position is interesting. It's not an assessment of Scottish Government policy performance. As we highlight in the report, it could be down to different policy decisions. It could be the result of a UK Government decision having an impact on Scotland relative to the UK. It could be a Scottish Government decision having an impact on Scotland relative to the UK. Or it could just be down to general economic performance in Scotland. London is also a factor. If the city has a really good year, it will be harder for Scotland with regard to the net tax position." And as for Labour, 256,000 jobs lost in the first 6 months after the budget. Not a good start. Ernst & Young's annual UK Attractiveness Survey reports with 8.2% of UK population, Scotland secured 15.8% of UK inward investment projects last year, creating 4,330 Scottish jobs. This record market share cements Scotland as the UK's top destination outside London for the 10th year in a row and the 6th best in Europe. Aberdeen, Edinburgh and Glasgow remain among the top 7 UK cities for foreign direct investment. EY's Global Investor Survey found a quarter of those planning to invest in the UK are targeting Scotland, maintaining a long-standing position as the UK's preferred destination outside London. Presiding Officer, Scotland's continued success in attracting inward investment is testament to our skilled workforce, world-class universities and commitment to innovation. Despite global economic instability, investors recognise the strength and stability of Scotland's economy. These projects bring high-quality jobs, long-term opportunities to communities across Scotland, and a clear sign Scotland is open for business. Of course, the inward-looking Tories don't want to hear that, and we close our overseas offices from which Scottish Development International engages with investors. We will pursue growth while the Tories undermine efforts to secure it.
You need to conclude.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and apologies for not taking interventions, but 4 minutes clearly isn't long enough.
Thank you. I now call Alexander Stewart to be followed by Daniel Johnson. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Our motion demands the end of a high-tax, low-delivery agenda, which the current Scottish Government has been pursuing for the last 18 years. These benches accept the fact that the Scottish Parliament should have a wide range of powers over taxation to support Scottish businesses and taxpayers and to incentivise strong economic growth. These are all things that the Scottish public would no doubt support, Presiding Officer. However, since receiving powers over Scottish income tax, the SNP have used these powers to turn Scotland into the highest tax part of the United Kingdom. After years of endless tinkering with Scottish income tax, the Scottish Government has left the system where anybody earning around £30,000 will pay more in tax than any other part of the United Kingdom. The tax system has no fewer than 6 separate bands, which the Institute of Fiscal Studies has described as being unnecessarily complicated, and Spice has pointed out that the system here has a higher rate, largely unchanged since 2017-18. That has dragged thousands of more taxpayers into a higher tax bracket, Presiding Officer. Around 22% of Scottish taxpayers are now paying a higher rate, a percentage which has doubled over the last 8 years. Yep. The motion asks about the economic performance gap that the Fiscal Commission has identified. The SNP's tax system is no doubt responsible for some of that gap. Yep. The Scottish Fiscal Commission's findings does assume that changes to the tax system will have a certain behavioural impact on that. Further analysis by the Institute of Fiscal Studies shows that the behavioural changes may be even worse than the Fiscal Commission's assumptions, presiding officer. That means that so much more is being spent and so much more is being wasted, and people are getting a worse deal. Presiding officer, I very much doubt that that's what the Scottish public wanted when they thought that taxation was being dealt with in this Parliament. So what are the taxpayers actually getting in exchange for their higher taxes? One, Scotland has an education system that is now internationally average. It has a record NHS waiting list. It has a litany of broken promises when it comes to upgrading roads. Combined with the bloated, costly public sector, as well as millions spent on ferries, it's very clear that the Scottish public are getting a raw deal, presiding officer. Our motion sets out a better deal for taxpayers and what it would look like. As well as a crackdown on waste, we would abolish the basic and intermittent tax rates. That would ensure that it could be up to £444 for every Scot who was earning up to £43,662. It would be 19p for every pound earned. As Sir Thomas Hunter has recently warned, Scotland is not reaching its full potential. It is not reaching its full potential. We need a new approach to the country's finances, instead of the old-fashioned left-wing approach which has dominated Scottish Government for far too long. A package of common-sense changes that we have put forward from these benches is the first step to ensuring that we are making progress. So when we look at this, the Scottish Government need to stop managing decline and start rewarding success. We have lots of successes in business across this country, but it is being stifled. It is being put out by the measures of the Scottish Government. This would empower Scotland to give Scottish taxpayers the value for money that they rightly deserve, presiding officer, rather than paying more and getting less.
Thank you. I now call Daniel Johnson to be followed by George Adam. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Johnson.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I think we need to lower the temperature a little bit. And as the Chamber knows, I always like to strike a consensual tone. So I'd like to thank both the government benches and the Conservative benches for giving me things that I can agree with from both of their arguments so far this afternoon, because I agree with the Conservatives that after 18 years for the Scottish Government suddenly to furnish us all with the figure of £1 billion of waste a year is somewhat striking, both in terms of the quantum, but the fact that it's taken them 18 years to come forward with that. But in turn, I would have to say that I agree with the Government. It is somewhat ironic for the Conservatives to come forward with a so miraculous plan that I note their own documentation doesn't actually add up their savings, so we don't know whether or not their sums add up at all. But not that, but 19 pence basic tax rate, 19 pence. When did we hear that last? That's right, the mini-budget under Liz Truss and Kwesi Kwarteng. They are literally coming to the Chamber with a straight face with the exact same uncosted tax cuts as proposed by the UK Conservative Government that led to the calamity, led to increased mortgage bills and a run on the pound and a run on the cost of borrowing the UK. It is simply not credible. I'm happy to give way if Chris Hoy can explain why.
Briefly, Craig
Does Mr Johnson not think that the people watching this debate will think it's a bit rich that the Labour Party that broke its promise on tax is lecturing this Parliament about tax?
Daniel Johnson.
And with that, we find out that the Conservatives have learned precisely nothing. So let's look at public service reform, because I think, frankly, I think Willie Rennie was absolutely right. Public service reform should be routine. It should be boring and it should be measured, but it should be continual. But the problem is this government has postponed it for 18 years. But I think there was a critical mistake that made by the Conservatives, because this is not about shrinking the state. This is about looking at where headcount increases should occur. Because the reality is, over the last decade, civil service headcount has increased by 71%. That is 3 times the rate of headcount increase in the NHS, 10 times that of local government, while we've seen police headcount fall by 6%, further education headcount fall by 10%. OK.
Daniel Johnson not recognise, though, that a large portion of that will be the establishment of Social Security Scotland, the devolution of welfare benefits?
It is less than a third. It is about 3,000 of that. It's a total headcount increase of between 8,000 to 9,000, and about a third of that is Social Security Scotland. So that is not an adequate answer. And frankly, this is also comes at a time when we know that we have £6.7 billion worth of waste from things like ferries, scrap deposit return schemes, all at a time when the Scottish Government seems to be seeking to reheat the arguments of full fiscal autonomy with the loss of a 20% premium that we gained through the Barnett formula. But ultimately, I think it's their lack of engagement with the economic performance gap, because they dismiss it as a technicality. It's not a technicality. The performance gap boils down to a difference in earnings of everyday Scots. It's about tax receipts. And it's instructive that the Cabinet Secretary couldn't answer the question about the increase of GDP per head since 2016, because it is this. It is 4.4% for the UK and 2.6% Scotland. And the reason that's important, because 2016 is the year that the fiscal devolution is benchmarked against. That data is important because that dictates how much money we have to spend. And the fact the Cabinet Secretary couldn't answer that question and doesn't understand the relevance of it tells you everything you need to know about the incompetence of the Scottish Government when it comes to public finances and the economy. And with that, I'll close.
Thank you very much. We now come to the final speaker in open debate, George Adam, up to 4 minutes, please.
Presiding officer, I was listening to the opening remarks from the Tory members and found it quite entertaining, because if you took it seriously you'd find it offensive. So I found it quite entertaining because one line in particular, it's only the Scottish Conservatives that know what Scots want. That made me chuckle, presiding officer. That's a total belter, as they say in my neck of the woods. Because, presiding officer, you've got to give the Conservatives their due. You know, if Tory political spin was renewable energy, Scotland would reach net zero by tea time. But as we live in the real world, we know that what the Conservatives are really all about. We know what they're all about. The Conservatives come in here today demanding a better deal for taxpayers, as if they have not just spent the last 14 years making everyone poorer, crashing the economy and sending household bills through the roof. The same crowd who gave us Liz Truss and a mortgage hike now wants us to believe they've got the answers. The Tories want us to believe they've suddenly found a magic formula for fixing the economy after they crashed it, after they hiked mortgages and they dragged us out of the EU, costing Scotland billions. And now here we are with a motion built on slogans with very little substance. The Conservatives talk about cracking down on waste, but offer no real plan, just the same old Tory playbook: cut taxes for high earners, slash public service to pay for it. They want to rip £1.5 billion out of the budget and then pretend nobody will notice the consequences to the NHS, schools or social care. Those of us with longer memories know exactly what the Tories are all about, and we know what Tory economics means for our communities. In the 1980s and 1990s, it was the same Conservative Party that sucked the economic life out of towns like Paisley. We watched as the looms fell silent and mill gates closed and Anchor and Ferguson Mill all disappeared. The car factories and electronic firms that once sustained local families shut down. One by one, unemployment soared and believed to be an acceptable case by an uncaring Westminster government. Community spirit in Paisley and towns across Scotland were tested to the limit. That wasn't reform. That was Tory economics at its harshest, and not supporting anyone from my community. That's what Tory value for money looks like in the real world, in real towns and for real people in Scotland. And now we have our Scottish Parliament with a Scottish Government that has delivered a balanced budget that funds frontline services, a budget most parties in this Parliament supported. And while the Tories were voting against the budget, the Scottish Government were investing in our NHS, boosting education, reintroducing winter fuel payments for pensioners and protecting the vulnerable. More than 60% of Scots are better off under our tax and social security policies. Most Scots pay less income tax than people elsewhere in the UK. And that's fairness in action, presiding officer. And unlike the Conservatives' lack of a plan, our approach is progressive, responsible and honest about how we will fund these services that people rely on. Presiding officer, For far too long, we have seen, while the Tories posture in here, Scotland is getting on with the job. We're growing the economy, and Scotland is the top destination in the UK for inward investment outside London for the 10th year in a row. Presiding Officer, in closing, I just want to say Scotland deserves better than further reheated Tory austerity. Scots deserve a government that invests in our people, protects the most vulnerable and builds for the long term. And that's exactly what this Scottish Government is doing every single day. And it's time for us to reject this Tory nonsense.
We now move to closing speeches. I call first Lorna Slater, up to 4 minutes. Ms Slater.
Thank you very much. I thought Craig Hoy's opening speech was spectacularly Trumpian in its content. Not only is he going to implement something like Doge to get rid of imaginary waste, he is also banning DEI and removing support for trans kids and adults. That's a heck of a track record to go on, given the, let's say, success of the Trump regime in America, where they've had the largest protests ever against those kind of policies. So good on the Scottish Conservatives for picking up on some popular policies there. No, I only have 4 minutes. One of the things that Craig Hoy said he was going to get rid of is the Scottish Land Commission, which of course is the public body that supports land reform in Scotland. Noting that land ownership in Scotland is highly unequal and concentrated, with a small number of individuals and entities owning vast areas of land, 433 landowners own 50% of Scotland's privately owned land. This concentration limits opportunities for local and community development, especially in rural areas. It's mind-boggling that the Conservatives would want to get rid of this, as they purport to champion rural areas. But, of course, really, the Scottish Conservatives are in the business of keeping the rich and powerful landlords and landowners rich and powerful. That's what they're here for. In terms of the contribution from Michael Mara, Scotland offers more generous and accessible public services than England, due to higher per capita spending and different policy choices made in Scotland. So the big question really is, will Labour bring in throughout the UK policies such as free school meals, free bus travel for under-22s, free prescriptions, to bring England's public services up to the level of Scotland's? Because so far England has been lagging behind, and the Scottish Labour Party need to have a look at how, now that they're in Westminster, they're going to help England to catch up. I'm sorry, Mr Kerr, I only have 4 minutes, so I need to press on. The single most important tax reform that we could make in Scotland is to reform the council tax. Unfortunately, every party other than the Scottish Greens voted against our proposals to revalue the council tax and move away from the absurdity of using 1991 property values, which has most people paying the wrong rate and is a regressive tax, meaning that the people who have the least pay the most. That is not fair, nor is it raising the kind of money that our councils actually need to provide public services. We only have to look at Liz Truss's mini-budget and Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill, which I'm sure Craig Hoy is a fan of, because he certainly sounded like he was adopting Trumpian policies, to see how tax cutting can be counterproductive to economic success and downright devastating for ordinary people. Tax cuts largely benefit the wealthy. Public services largely benefit people on average wages who have children, health needs and care needs. I know who I'd like the government to support. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now call Michael Manna, up to 4 minutes. Mr Manna.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I welcome the new consensus in Scottish politics, signed up to by all sides, perhaps even by artificial intelligence, that this government is wasting a massive amount of money. And clearly, we're going to hear more about that tomorrow. And a very well-advertised intervention, I think, from Willie Rennie. We can expect it to be very boring, but hopefully very detailed. And the Minister is well aware that the Finance Committee of this Parliament has been calling for a proper programme of public service reform for years now. And there's been many independent sources have bemoaned the fact there has been no evidence as such. And clearly, given it's the Tory debate, what we've had in front of us Christie is their own proposition based on their recently published policy document. So I gave it its second download today, just this afternoon, and a thriller it is. Plenty of moody. Plenty of pictures of Russell Finlay looking moody. Does he ever look anything but on that basis? And it sets a target of savings of some £642 million. It does identify a £1.5 million saving by closing Architecture and Design Scotland. But unfortunately, £500 million of the heavy lifting, the £500 million, is to be saved by putting that figure and drawing a target around it on one of the pages. And that's how the money is to be saved. A project to save £500 million with no detail whatsoever about how to do it. And of course, the rest is to be stopping the wasted time on woke. That's how the rest of the money is to be saved. It's a risible attempt at an intervention in the public spending debate that I don't think is frankly worth the publication at all. It is right-wing populism by numbers. It is frankly fantastical nonsense. And so unfortunately that brings me in part to Kenny Gibson's contribution and his rejection of the tax changes taken that the UK Labour government have put in place. Now, of course, he's right to point out some of the challenges that arise from those tax changes. Unfortunately, the SNP government has rejected the entirety of the tax adjustment, some £45 billion that's had to take place to try and rescue the public finances from the mess left by the Tory government. And it doesn't stop there, because prior to the UK budget last autumn, there was, of course, demands from the SNP government for some £70 billion of additional spending. But they didn't stop there, Presiding Officer. In the run-up to the spending review, just in the last few weeks, another £20 billion of demands for public spending. So, in total, some £90 billion of demands, £90 billion, and a complete rejection of £45 billion of how to raise the money. It's not credible, it's not sensible, and frankly, for a government that wants to engage on a proactive basis, as we hear from the Cabinet Secretary on a regular basis, on a proper level with the UK government, it's not fit for purpose, far from it. Because last week we had the unedifying spectacle of the Finance Secretary agreeing with Alba and Reform that the Barnett formula in Scotland should be scrapped. So utter nonsense, frankly, to give up voluntarily an additional 20% of public spending in Scotland. And Lorna Slater asked about the funding of public services across the rest of the UK. She might have missed the massive expansion of free school meals in south of the border, but she will know that £9.1 billion of additional spending is coming to Scotland. And I'll close, Presiding Officer, by paying tribute to, I think, Daniel Johnson's very relevant observation that the date of 2016 is incredibly important to the fiscal framework in this country. I would advise the Cabinet Secretary to revise our speaking notes on this basis. The fact that we have the UK GDP per head grew by 4.4% compared to the 2.6% figure in Scotland is critical to that economic performance gaps that flows through the fiscal framework to which the Cabinet Secretary is a signatory.
Thank you. I now call on Ivan McKee, Minister, up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and thanks to everyone who took part in this debate. I'd like to start with Willie Rennie and give him my sincere and heartfelt assurance that tomorrow my statement will indeed be very boring, but it will address the challenges that he's identified. Because he's absolutely right. You treating this as some kind of show is not what gets to the reality of the detail that needs to be dealt with in order to transform Scottish public services, and I'll go through that in more detail tomorrow. Other points that Willie Rennie made round about digital, again, something I'll cover in some extent, significant extent tomorrow, but I would say that AI is very much in our consideration, but we do have, of course, need to get the balance right and make sure that ethics are well considered when we are rolling out AI. But it's something I'll talk more tomorrow. Daniel Johnson.
Daniel Johnson, briefly.
There's much we may disagree on, but I wonder if you agree with this point. This is not about shrinking the state, that reform needs to be about freeing up people for the frontline public service delivery. Was that something he'd agree with?
Yes, I absolutely can. It's not about a smaller state, it's about getting the state that's the right size to deliver what it needs to deliver and getting the workforce and the resources in the right place to deliver exactly that. And Willie Rennie talks about our NHS, and of course just yesterday the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care unveiled 2 documents around service renewal and population health that articulate how we're going to take the reform agenda forward in the health and social care space. Craig Hoy talked at length about all kinds of stuff, as usual, looking for uncosted tax cuts at the same time as spending increases, what we've come to expect from the Tory party. I had a wee look. I think I must have been the third person after Michael Marr to download the Tory document. I had a wee look there while I was listening to Craig Hoy. As far as I can, he's identified 3 public bodies that he wants to get rid of. It's a long, long way from the quarter of public bodies that he's targeting. Then, of course, he's going to add another one by putting another quango in place whose job it is to, I'm not quite sure, take forward the work that this government has already taken forward without an additional quango. And if he's paying attention yesterday, would have noted when the Cabinet Secretary for Health merged 2 NHS bodies because we're very much in the business of looking for opportunities to save cash, and where that does involve structural change, of course, we shall take that forward. And again, I'll say more about that tomorrow. Somebody want to come in? No? OK, just a lot of chuntering from a sedentary position. Moving on to Rachel Hamilton, which I don't need to... Yes, indeed.
Douglas Lumsden, briefly.
I thank the Minister for taking an intervention. When you're looking for savings, will you also be looking for savings for ministers taking limos to pubs? Because that's savings that could easily be had.
Through the chair, Mr Lumsden. Minister.
I think I missed that. A bit more articulate, perhaps. I think I missed anything. Kenny Gibson characterised it very correctly, talking about more akin to double glazing salesmen. In reference to PPE contracts south of the border, if you want to look for inefficiencies, that's a very interesting place to look. And the recycling point, I mean, Craig Hoy very much in the recycling business, as Daniel Johnston pointed out, recycling Liz Truss's policies. Now, talking about the Scottish economy that Kenny Gibson referenced, higher GDP growth per person in the long term, higher productivity growth per person in the long term, lower unemployment in the here and now, best FDI performance over the last 10 years anywhere outside of London. As a consequence of the international offices that we have, the SDI has around the globe, that the Tories, of course, want to close, shutting off that access to those international investors. Higher growth in the Scottish economy in 2024 than in the UK economy. Interestingly, half of that year was under Tory jurisdiction and the other half under Labour jurisdiction, so I don't know who you would blame there for the poor performance of the UK economy vis-à-vis what happened in Scotland. And, of course, more people earning the real living wage in Scotland than in the rest of the UK. I listened with interest to Russell Finlay on the Sunday show at the weekend, and he threw out a number. I had to go back and check whether he'd articulated it correctly. He claimed there was 5,500 public sector workers in Scotland earning more than £130,000 a year. Now, we haven't been able to source that figure. If he's got the stats for it, I'd love to see it. But what we think he's including is the 6,000 consultants and employed GP staff on top of that, that of course are in that bracket, because we can find only a few dozen beyond that number that are in that category. So if Russell Finlay's message to the people of Scotland is he's going to take an axe to NHS Scotland, NHS consultants, then I think people should be aware of that. I want to talk a wee bit very briefly in my closing time about the work that we have done on public service reforms. It's important to recognise that this is a journey. Much has already been done. What we'll articulate tomorrow is the next stage in that journey. We've reduced the number of public bodies in Scotland from 199 to 131. The Police and Fire Reform Act has saved almost £2.5 billion over the past 10 years from back office costs, and just in the last 2 years we've saved £280 million through the work we've taken forward in procurement, estates and automation of back office duties. Presiding Officer, in conclusion, this is a government that balances its budget every year. We take Scotland's finances seriously. We'll be laying out next week in the medium-term financial strategy and our fiscal sustainable delivery plan the detail of that, and tomorrow I'll be laying out the work we're taking forward in the next phase of our public service reform agenda.
Thank
you very much,
Minister.
Presiding Officer.
I now call on Liz Smith to wind up the debate. Up to 6 minutes. Ms.
Thank you. Now, Deputy Presiding Officer, I am not usually somebody who gets confused, but my goodness I am today, because here we have a Cabinet Secretary who's very fond of asking us as opposition parties to spell out exactly what we would do differently. But when we do, she objects. And then she dismisses all our accusations of SNP waste, but now she has admitted that we're right. And as for Lorna Slater, Deputy Presiding Officer, I have to say I was very glad that this was a short debate. But can I put this debate in context by acknowledging some of the fundamental weaknesses in the Scottish economy, which have been much debated by the independent analysts. Not only did they flag up the extent of the fiscal predicament in which the Scottish Government finds itself, but they also made clear that largely resulted from the Scottish Government's own decisions. They highlighted the failure to deliver sustained economic growth, concerns over tax structures and especially differentials, and issues with the delivery of more efficient public services, which, as we know, has been exercising the mind of the Finance Committee for many months, although in terms of the convener today, I'm not sure you would have got that impression. The bottom line is that Scotland has not been creating the growth which it desperately needs to pay for increasing demands on public services. And if we listen to senior figures in business, like Sandy Begbie, they're all telling you that Scottish... Yes, of course.
Minister, briefly.
Well, if that's the case, let's both explain why the Scottish economy grew faster than the UK economy last year in 2024.
Liz Smith.
Well, Daniel Johnson was the one who raised a very relevant point about the extent of the growth over a period of time. That's the key issue. That's what analysts are talking about. And can I just pay tribute to the Deputy First Minister, who made a very interesting speech at Panmure House 2 weeks ago, where top of the priority was about trying to ensure that there is much better collaboration between the public and private sectors, which is exactly what we have to do to try to stimulate the growth that is so sadly missing. That's an important part, and I hope that's now part of Scottish Government policy, because if it isn't, we're going to have even more difficulties in paying for public services. Now, the public sector is bloated. There's no question about that. And the figure, every single figure that you look at tells you that it is bloated. And I want to come back to the point that was raised in this chamber some months ago. We all got used to the state bailing us out in COVID. That was absolutely fine and correct as it was at the time. But that expectation is still with us. People still are expecting the state to do all the work for the Scottish economy. That isn't good enough, because it's not there to be able to solve the problems that we need to address. We need to attend to the economic inactivity in this country. That was raised by Willie Rennie as the most important problem. It is. We need to get people back to work, and we need to get people to take personal responsibility for their lives and not expect the state to do everything. And the Scottish Government has got to waken up to the fact that all the policy development that it's had over quite a long period of time, especially when it comes to welfare spend, is all about a big state. It's not working for Scotland, and as several of my colleagues have argued this afternoon, we're getting less for paying more.
Absolutely.
And that is just something that can't go on. Now, I want to finish on the point that was raised, interestingly, by the Joseph Rowntree Federation. And they have said that it is absolutely imperative that we have a debate, a proper debate, about universalism, because this Scottish Government, with its social contract, is absolutely in thrall to the principle of universalism, but it's very clear that we cannot afford that universal principle in quite an area of welfare spend. The Cabinet Secretary has often asked me, what would we cut? I want to throw back to the Cabinet Secretary, and I've argued this with the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice. We have to have a debate about universal policy, because there are some areas of that universal policy which is giving benefits to people who could easily afford to pay for some of these benefits themselves. That is not how the welfare system should work. It should be about lifting up those who are in particular need and targeting those who have... I think I'm about to finish, am I? Well,
very briefly, Minister.
Yeah, I was going to ask her who specifically she's targeting with that message. I'm interested to hear. But also, while I'm on my feet, I just want to let her know that inactivity in Scotland at the moment is 21.6%. When her Tory government was in office this time last year, it was at 22.3%. So it's actually lower in Scotland than it was when the Tories were in office in England.
Well, there are 2 points there, but when it comes to the economic inactivity, that's the key issue. And as Willie Rennie rightly pointed out, sorry, that is not
Minister,
correct.
please.
That is not correct in terms of the balance of the Scottish economy against the UK economy. Well, I'm sure we can debate it offline, but I've been going with the Scottish Fiscal Commission statistics. But when it comes to this question of universal payments, you're asking me about what I would do. I do think we have to look at the areas of universal payments where quite clearly they're not all being taken up. That's an area of overspend. And it's also a case where, in terms of targeting those most in need, that's what we should be doing, not giving a whole range of benefits out to people who don't necessarily need them. That's a way forward, and on that point, I'll finish.
Thank you, Ms Smith. That concludes the debate. There will be a brief pause before we move on to the next debate, just to allow front benches to change.